The Genesis 6 narrative states that the Nephilim are on the earth in those days and also afterwards. If that's true, can we find evidence that corroborates this? I'm L.A. Marzulli. Join me as we go on the trail of the Nephilim. There is an ancient site in New Hampshire that may date back 4,000 years. It is called America's Stonehenge. There are precise alignments of standing stones, which reflect the solstices and equinoxes. There is also a controversial stone altar, which may have been used for human sacrifice. The site is built on an 18.5-year lunar cycle, like that of Stonehenge, England, and the Great Circle Mound and Octagon Mound complex that we see in Ohio. At America's Stonehenge, massive stones were fitted together to create this mysterious site, but whoever built it seemingly abandoned it. You will see just how incredible this site is as we reveal what appears to be a deliberate and orchestrated relationship to Stonehenge, England, as well as other megalithic sites around the globe. Journey with us as we explore America's Stonehenge. Dennis Stone, it's a pleasure to be here once again at America's Stonehenge, and what I want to do is drill down into the history of this incredible site. Tell us about what your father did And how many years ago was that? And why did he rescue this piece of property?
Well, thank you so much for coming up here today. My dad got involved almost 65 years ago, 1955. He was an engineer at AT&T Bell Laboratories, and he had just got out of the Coast Guard. He spent some time up in Labrador near where the Vikings, eventually we found out where they landed up there, and he was always interested in history. If he had been up in Labrador maybe a few years later, he could have actually visited the Viking site, but he was there just prior to that. So he had a new family. He was building a new home, actually hand building a home up in Derry.
Wow.
And on a Friday night, he was listening to a show on one of the largest radio stations in New England, right out of Boston. And the name of the show was called Yankee Yarns. Alton Hall Blackington was the talk show host. And they weren't talking politics and some of the other things. They were talking about this ancient stone site. Today we know it as America's Stonehenge. And he had never heard of this. He was only about 7 or 8 miles from here too. And he grew up in that area in the next town called Derry. So the show really fascinated him. He's like, how can this place exist next door, basically, you know? So a couple days later, he's at a barber shop waiting to have his hair done. He's looking at a magazine, and the magazine was called New Hampshire Profile. And as he opened it up, the main feature was, again, the same thing, this site. And the magazine...
A little serendipitous there. No?
Yeah, you know, one of those cool, I guess, yeah, exactly, like a coincidence. But he... the magazine was 3 years old and it had been sitting in the barber shop for 3 years. Fortunately, they hadn't thrown it away. So he asked the barber if he could keep it. And the barber goes, how old is that? He goes, well, 1952. And this is 1955. So he said, sure, take it. That weekend, my dad's and my aunt and uncles are all having a social get-together, playing cards and everything on a Friday night, about 10 or 12 people. And my dad took the magazine and put it in front of everybody. Anybody recognized this? And they passed it around. Nobody recognized it until it got to my aunt and uncle. And they saw it and they said, wow, we used to go there in the 1930s. And we used to picnic up there. So my family's kind of link to this place goes back at least to the 1930s. So my dad's next question is, can you find this place? So they said, well, we haven't been there in 20 years. So the next day on Sunday, they all came down here. I was about 1 year old at the time. I got stuck with grandma and grandpa, I guess. And they came down, they drove around till they found an old road. It's not the road that the public comes in today. It was a side road, and they took a chance, went up there, and sure enough, they saw the place. And after that, my dad just basically, you know, fell in love with the place. He met the owner of the place, and he opened it up 3 years later, 1958, as Mystery Hill Caves. So we've been in business with the museum for about 61 years. So,
I see.
Yeah, so I'm a second generation, and I have a son who's actually a third generation. His name is Kelsey.
The site is somewhat controversial. Some people, modern day archaeologists, insist that these are just root cellars, that all the features that we see here were done by farmers, by people who lived here. What say you?
Yeah, the place does not look like a farm. The Patty family that came here in 1734 bought a piece of the property, and he was a third generation shoemaker. His name was Seth Patty. His grandfather was Peter, came over from England. Then there was a Richard, another shoemaker, and then Seth. And Seth bought 2 pieces of property, 1734 and 10 years later in 1744. He's the one that may have built a wooden house on top of the site and altered it somewhat. Some people say that they built the site, the family. But it doesn't look like a farm. It does not look like a shoe shop, because there are shoemakers, nor does it look like the sacrificial table often is called the cider press or a lye stone. It doesn't look like a cider mill up there at all, nor ivory soap making factory. Because some people say, well, that big stone was a lye stone for making soap. So mainstream archaeologists say no explorers before Columbus, and they also say there's no ancient stone ruins in this period. So this site should not be here. But there are about 800 of these sites from Quebec, eastern part of Quebec, all the way through New England, down into Pennsylvania, New Jersey, in that area of the Mid-Atlantic. So this is not a site by itself. So either the Patties are very prolific, or these were built by an ancient, lost culture of stone builders. And by the way, Elliot, we're finding the same kind of stonework out in eastern Colorado, Alabama, and a couple other western sites. So it's not just a northeast kind of thing.
And of course, that's why we're on the trail, and it certainly is mysterious on some level, and to just dismiss this as root cellars and that farmers did this is convenient, because it fits their paradigm. But if there is a hidden history, if there is another alternative explanation, we want to drill down into it, and that's why we're here. Your father basically rescued this because the property could have been bulldozed, and there could be houses, because this house is right across the street. So builders doing what they do, they like to build. This is choice property because it's a high place, it's a hillside. Did he not rescue it, in fact, from the builders?
He did, yeah. He and the Patties were here until the late, about 1865.
Okay.
And then the land was lumbered for a while by a guy named Nathaniel H. Paul. So we have a pretty good record of the history of it. But yeah, some people say, well, you know, this place is open to the public, you charge admission, you're trying to make a buck. Our answer to that is to make money a lot quicker and a lot more would be to sell it for real estate.
Sure.
There's 110 acres here that we are protecting from development, basically, and we're doing it on our own, you know. And by the way, a lot of these sites, I mentioned about 800, many of these that my dad first saw in the 1950s and 60s are gone today. The highways are built over them, houses have been built over them, and so we lost quite a few of these. And this site could be, as you mentioned, could be a housing development today.
Sure. Yeah. Is this site one of the highest places in the county?
Yeah, it's one of the higher hills. It's 360 feet above sea level.
Okay.
However, the hills around here are a little bit higher, and what we found out in the 1970s, we're kind of in the middle of a bowl, and the rim is slightly higher than us. So when we have an astronomical alignment with the moon or sun, it's about a half a degree up look, and the sun is more, it's actually sharper. You don't have as much refraction. If it was flat, then you'd have the big ball of sun or the moon, and they look beautiful, but they're not as accurate for an astronomical alignment. And they use the horizon, actually little notches and dips in the horizon to line up the alignments with.
Amazing.
Horizon features, they call them.
Just amazing.
Yeah, so that's kind of cool,
and
actually.
we'll see some of that as we move through the site.
Yes, we will, yeah.
Great. Dennis Stone, the owner and curator of America's Stonehenge, claimed that the site was around 4,000 years old. We were curious to see if Dennis had any proof of this. We were joined by our colleague Fritz Zimmerman, and what Dennis showed us proved, at least to us, that the site had out-of-place artifacts that seemed to point to a pre-Columbian presence whose origins were from the Middle East. This information bolsters our theory that there were Nephilim tribes that fled the Levant 3,500 years ago, when Joshua and Caleb pressed the conquest of Canaan. As I heard Dennis elaborate on the mysterious Baal stone, I began to wonder whether America's Stonehenge was actually Nephilim architecture and fallen angel technology. Fritz Zimmerman, this is Dennis Stone, America's Stonehenge.
Nice to meet you.
Good to see you again, my friend. Definitely.
Nice to see you, LA.
What blew me away here is we have an out-of-place artifact which shouldn't be here. And in my opinion, and I make these statements and I get criticized for them, but it rewrites America's history. If it's real, and I believe it is, it rewrites the history of the world as we know it. And there seems to be a group of people, and we'll get into this later, that deliberately obfuscate, keep this information away from the American people and the peoples of the world. So tell us about this stone and why this is so important.
Yeah, this stone was found in the chamber in ruins, one of our chambers on the main site, in 1964 by a researcher named James Woodall. And he actually found two different stones. And it sat in our building for about 11 years as an unknown script, until 1975 when Dr. Barry Fell from Harvard University came up. And he looked at this stone among a couple others and eventually identified it. He translated it as Iberian Punic or Phoenician, found in Spain and Portugal. And it said it's basically that temple, that structure was dedicated to Baal in behalf of the Canaanites, which is what the Phoenicians would have known themselves as.
Which I find absolutely incredible, because the Canaanites, which is a general term for the people living in the Levant, are basically a Nephilim tribe. And that speaks to what that's why we're on the trail, that's why we came to this site. So Baal is the ancient Canaanite god that these entities worship. Why would the critics say that it's not genuine? What have the critics said? Well, someone just, carved this on a weekend or whatever.
Because it shouldn't be here. No explorers before Columbus,
Of course.
and no ancient stone ruins in the Northeast. And
so anything that goes against that paradigm is dismissed.
Exactly. It's guilty until proven innocent, basically.
Fritz, what are your thoughts when you look at this?
Well, it's just another layer of what we're finding from the Middle East. In our travels, we've already seen Grave Creek Stone, which was a form of Hebrew. Back Creek Stone, so Hebrew keeps showing up. I think this is the first chapter of what we've been looking in Ohio. I think this is an earlier time. I think this is my theory that they came over here for the copper and had settlements here in the east.
So we have a stone here that is over 3,000 years old, that has Phoenician script, that's dedicated to Baal, ancient god of the Canaanites. We were in Israel, and we went to this place called Tel Gezer. It's an ancient Canaanite city, over 3,000 years old. They were standing stone menhirs in a line, once again pointing out the equinoxes and the solar alignments. But what caught my attention was a very large altar with a basin carved into it to catch the blood. What's amazing about this site here at Tel Gezer, the sign, which I'm absolutely blown away it actually says, is that this was used to hold blood. So this is an altar in front of these standing stones. This is the ancient religion of the dragon, in my opinion. We're looking at a cult activity that's based in Mesopotamia, based in Babylon, the old system. It goes back to Nimrod and Semiramis. It's thousands of years old. And it's just amazing to see this. Again, I think, could men do it? That's what we always hear. They had wheels and levers, and that's a typical story, and sand ramps and all this other stuff. But you plug in two 12-footers or 3 or 4 12-foot Nephilim in here, and we know that the Nephilim were in this area, absolutely in this area. Everything changes. Everything changes.
This is an amulet we found, very small one, and this eight horns symbol it's the symbol of the god Ishtar, and this is the symbol of the god moon Sin. And also we found a scarab. You see a scarab here from the Hyksos period. So it's combination, beautiful combination, because we found it together. This is Egyptian source, this is Mesopotamian source, and both arrived here to the Canaanite people that were called Hyksos in that period.
By Tel Gezer, we discovered something that blew us away. There was a very large tunnel that went deep into the earth. The tunnel was at least 20 feet tall at the opening. Why does a 5'6" Canaanite man need a tunnel that's 20 feet high? We asked one of the archaeologists who was present what he thought about it. Here is his testimony. Looking at the cavern below, the ceiling is about 20 feet. Why do you think it's that way?
That's a really good question. Could be because they were taller. Could be because you're dealing with the taller people. I have no idea. But we know there's got to be something else going on, other than just being a water system. There's really no point to be digging a water system quite so deep and with steps like that. So the standing stones and the niches in the wall really make us think there's some kind of cultic significance to it as well.
And you have such a similar type of an artifact here at America's Stonehenge. Talk about, just kind of tease us about the altar a little bit.
What's one of the main features up here? The stone is about 4.5 tons, 9,000 pounds, shaped like a bell, and the groove on top of it's very deep. We thought rectangular. Recently we did some measuring on the groove. It's actually a trapezoidal shape. And in the front there's actually a little runnel that comes off of it, and it goes into the bedrock where there's a cutout in the bedrock, where when you had a fluid on the table, it could flow off the table through that runnel and then drip into either a vase or into the bedrock cutout itself. And certainly it's over 9 feet long, 6 feet wide, the dimensions of it. So it's a very, very large slab, and it sets up on 4 legs. It's against the oracle chamber, the biggest structure that's still remaining on the site. Connected by a tube, which is 6 feet long. It's like a hollow stone tube. If somebody stood inside the oracle chamber and shouted, the voice will come out under the table. It would sound like an oracle, perhaps. Yeah, so this oracle chamber is named after the oracle tube. It runs about 6 feet from where my hand is to underneath the sacrificial table. If people were watching a ceremony on the table from above, they would not know that tube was there, and this chamber is well hidden. So it's kind of like the Wizard of Oz, you know, somebody could stand here, and actually people may have been on different sized people that were here, and one group of people might have been just the right height to stand here on the step, yell through here, the voice will come out, and they would hear a spirit or a god or something talking to them during a ceremony. It might have been very, very impressive.
I'm underneath the stone chamber in America's Stonehenge. It's an incredible structure. What I want to call your attention to is the large slabs of stone. You'll notice that we saw the same type of chamber in Norba, in Italy. Here I am in what can only be described as, at one time, was a very secret chamber underneath the Temple Mount here in Norba, Italy. We can see that once again the stones are cut with great precision and placed, and we have these megaliths on top of us holding the entire weight of the stones above it, and of course the dirt above that. We also saw the same type of construction on the island of Sardinia at the Tomb of the Giants. And it's interesting how that tomb is called the Tomb of the Giants in Sardinia. And here we are in America's Stonehenge. We see these very ginormous slabs of stone which create the roof. And by the way, there's a layer of either clay and cement that goes back thousands of years, which has kept this area completely waterproof. Now there are underground springs, and that's why we have some of the water on the ground here. But when it rains, the walls remain dry. There's an area in here to my right which we call the bed, but it's about 8 to 9 feet long and certainly can accommodate someone to sleep. There's also a little niche to the right here. And again, this corresponds to what we saw on the island of Sardinia, where initiates would come into these chambers and basically sleep. And in doing that, over a period of time, they would allegedly communicate with the spirits of the giants. I'm actually squatting down in this little niche inside the chamber of the Tomb of the Giants. And what's incredible about this, it reminds me of a chamber that we've seen in America's Stonehenge, thousands of miles away in New Hampshire. That the Nephilim that were killed in the flood, the spirits of the Nephilim have been doomed to wander the earth. So says the book of Enoch. These are, in my opinion, the demonic entities which are global. Demons have to inhabit something in order to manifest, whether it's a person, an animal, or an object. It must go into something in order to manifest. So these initiates who would come into a place like this and sleep in this chamber to my right here would be embracing the demonic. And before you think that that's far out, there are Satanists and occultists today who are doing exactly the same thing. Dennis wanted to show us how ancient seafarers might have reached a new world, as he embraces diffusionism rather than isolationism. Diffusionism believes that people traveled the world and explored it. Isolationism, which is the prevailing paradigm in modern-day archaeology, states that people did move about and exploration happened very slowly. The reason this is important is, as a diffusionist, I maintain that people reached the New World far in advance of Columbus. Of course, mainstream archaeology insists this never happened, so we are at an impasse. And this is why sites like America's Stonehenge are ignored and immediately called hoaxes. But as you will see, the evidence points to diffusionism. In other words, if the site is really 4,000 years old, then it does in fact rewrite our history books.
Well, I'm standing in front of a world map with pictures of ancient sites and actually sea routes. Some of these are hypothetical, some of these actually occurred. Starting over here in the Middle East, the Phoenician coast, around 4,000 years ago, roughly. After that time, the Phoenicians actually set up 50 trading colonies going across the Mediterranean. Heading towards the west, they had a couple of cities in Spain, Carthago, Nova, and a couple others. And then actually, they actually had some settlements in the west coast of Africa, spreading in the westward direction. Some of the Phoenicians may have visited up into this area of northern Europe. It's very, very likely they got up there. And the thought is they had this as a stepping off point, the Iberian Peninsula, and then going west. There's ocean currents, wind currents that would take them across the ocean towards the direction of, the West Indies in this area, I guess Barbados, towards the Caribbean actually, and into either Central, or they could head south into South America possibly, or going into North America, and that's where our site is. And there's about 800 of these sites from eastern Quebec through New England, right into New York, Pennsylvania, and there's actually some other similar works as you head a little bit further west. So our thought is that they originated in possibly the Middle East, worked their way across the 1,500 miles of the Mediterranean, and then into Europe, and then they may have actually somewhere in this area, Spain possibly, launched, and then they came into the Americas.
What I find absolutely incredible about this, and maps are always wonderful because we really get a good visual of the overview of what we're looking at. Thor Heyerdahl proved in his film, Ra, that one could build a replica of an ancient Egyptian papyrus boat, sail it from the Straits of Gibraltar, let the wind, without any maps, no compass or anything else, just the trade winds carry you, and you wind up on the island of Barbados here. This is a launching pad to the New World. And this, of course, as you pointed out, between 35 and 3,500 years ago, 4,000 years ago. What I find incredibly interesting about this is that it ties in to the ancient biblical prophetic narrative where Joshua and Caleb go into what is known as the Promised Land, the Levant. And in that, they find, in that land, that the giants are there, the Nephilim are there, the Rephaim are there, the Zanzumim, the Emims, all names of different Nephilim tribes, the Anakim, which means long necks. And because of that, there's this mandate that goes down from the God of the Old Testament, which says, wipe them all out. Men, women, and children, burn everything. And that's genocidal. That's homicidal. It's maniacal. Unless we're looking at these hybrid beings which are not fully human. And I would classify them as the soulless ones.
The proposed route is England and then the northern islands, and then coming across, but more of a northern route into Labrador, Newfoundland, where we have some megalithic remains. We have some menhirs, dolmens, stone mounds with doorway lintels, and then eventually making their way into the St. Lawrence Seaway, which was going to eventually push them into Lake Superior, the Copper region, which either is going to be coming back out the St. Lawrence or possibly down the Mississippi River and then into the Gulf of Mexico.
One of the most incredible artifacts found in America's Stonehenge is what has become known as the Baal stone. According to the Encyclopedia Britannica, Baal was worshipped in many ancient Middle Eastern countries, especially among the Canaanites, who apparently considered him a fertility deity and one of the most important gods in their pantheon. Charred skeletons of children have been discovered together at Tel Gezer and Megiddo in Israel. The ancient prophet Jeremiah states this, "And they built the high places of Baal, which are in the valley of the son of Hinnom, to cause their sons and their daughters to pass through the fire unto Molech, which I commanded them not. Neither came it into my mind that they should do this abomination." All of this makes me wonder where the dedication written on the Baal stone and what is known as the sacrificial table, or as I prefer to call it, the sacrificial altar, are inexorably connected to each other. When Kelsey Stone showed me the stone for the first time, I was astonished and almost couldn't believe what I was hearing. Here is the uncut version of a discovery.
What we have over here are a few of the inscriptions that we've found on the site. This one right here is Iberian Punic, and actually it was found by Jim Whittall. And actually we had Dr. Barry Fell up on our site, and he took a look at some of these inscriptions and translated them himself. This one right here reads basically from right to left, Tubal of the Canaanites. This is in dedication. So
I gotta stop you. Hold
Sure.
on. Which one reads to Baal?
Yeah, so this one right here. So this is so this is the actual stone, and then we have a plaster cast above that just kind of highlights everything.
And this reads to Baal.
That's correct. Yep. And we have,
Tell me one more time again what it says.
yeah. So Tubal of the Canaanites. This is in dedication. Yeah.
Okay, continue.
So, sure. Yeah, so, I mean, we have a few others. There's, we have an Ogum here. There's some other just general effigies as well. There's a bird, an arrow found here. We've had reindeer carvings. We've also found a Celtic sun symbol as well. And that's right over here. And that was found by Dan Leary and my father, Dennis.
So when you read or when you hear that it says to Baal, the Canaanites, what do archaeologists say when you? I mean,
that's still somewhat of a hot topic. You know, I think the archaeologists that we've had up on the site, the ones that I think kind of can appreciate the site, you know, when they actually come up and take a look at it, they in general, I think we've had pretty positive reactions from them. But obviously, it is somewhat controversial to be talking about, you know, Phoenicians coming across to the New World.
So I'm amazed at what I'm looking at here, and thank you for bringing them out of the case. Kelsey and I were talking about the Baal stone, which has this ancient Canaanite inscription talking about that this site was dedicated to Baal. Speak to that, please.
So we had the Phoenician, as we mentioned, Iberic Punic, and it says.
Did you hold that up so we can get a shot?
Yeah, it's a little bit heavy, but we can manage it. Yeah, it's pretty solid. And this was found in a chamber called the Chamber in Ruins. The Chamber in Ruins is an interesting structure. It has about a 6,000-pound roof slab and a 1,000-pound lintel that are collapsed into the chamber.
And your father found this rock has been laying like this for who knows, you know, hundreds of years, if not thousands. We don't know.
Right. When came and took pictures in
this is the way it was.
Already like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the mysterious Baal stone was found where?
Yeah, I was on, I believe, down near the lintel stone, near the entrance to the chamber.
Was it buried or what?
Yeah, it was. There was some debris down there, some dirt, debris, and it was found underneath the stone, so it was kind of protected.
And who found that stone?
James Woodall in 1964.
Okay.
Yeah, and he was.
So we absolutely have provenance of the stone.
Where it came from, yeah,
okay.
And the date, yeah,
and the date,
and the name of the person that found it, yeah.
So in other words, what we hear from, let's say, the Grave Creek stone or the Bat Creek stone is, oh, it's a forgery, or just like the Norcolli stones, oh, it's a forgery. But we have provenance for this. We have the gentleman who I assume signed some sort of paperwork stating that he found it.
I have seen a chamber almost exactly like that in Carnac, France, in 1984, although I don't have any photographs and I have not been able to pull it up on the website. But that chamber has been carbon dated 3 different ways. In the early dating's 4,000 years. 3,000 year dating came out of it also. But this is the one that says dedicated to Baal on behalf of Canaanites. And it's a 22-letter Phoenician alphabet, and our alphabet comes from that alphabet. You know, that we used to. Pretty amazing. So that's a Phoenician one we found. In that same chamber, we found a Libyan stone. And this was found in the same chamber as this stone. They were found, this stone and this stone were found in the mid-60s, and they were doing some research on the structure, and they were going to try to get the roof slab out and the lintel. They found these. They weren't able to do that because they didn't have heavy enough equipment to remove the roof slab. But these stones came out of
Wait a minute, I gotta stop. Wait a minute, I gotta stop here. They didn't have heavy enough equipment to move the lintel, the roof slab. And how heavy is the roof slab?
So it weighs about between 3 and 4 tons.
Okay.
It's a good chunk, and the lintel weighs over 1,000 pounds. Okay. And it's in kind of a confined area, so whoever built this obviously were good engineers.
Now, let me ask you something, and I think you guys know where I'm coming from. I believe that there were giants that roamed the Americas. We have the oral tradition from Native American people telling us there were 9, 10, 12 footers. We have the historical record found in different papers all over the country talking about 9, 10, 12 footers. The large skeleton, a 9-footer that I found on Catalina, did go viral. And it shows us that something is going on here. Now, when you tell me that modern day researchers were out here and they couldn't move the roof because it was too heavy. But what if you had, and I want to get your thoughts on this, what if you had a 10 or 12 footer here, not human, but big, 10, 12 foot tall, and when you go up, you go out like this. What do you think about that as a possible scenario?
I mean, certainly much more capable.
Yeah, I mean,
if you get the strength and the size does matter when you're working on these stones.
Because interestingly enough, we know from the biblical narrative that the Nephilim tribes were there. We know from just historical records from Flavius Josephus about 2,000 years ago that the bones of the Nephilim, these giants, were completely different from men. So it's there in the history. It's also in the oral tradition of Native Americans to talk about these 10, 12-foot giants that were cannibalistic, that were sadistic, that would come into areas and pull the heads off of the braves and drink the blood. So which is incredibly gruesome, but when we think about this, and then we come up with 3,000-ton stones that we have trouble moving in modernity. Let me ask you something. What did they say when they couldn't move the stone? How was that done? What?
Well, yeah, this is back in '64, you know.
Okay.
And so
we have new equipment.
Yeah,
might be able to do it.
Might be able to do it.
But still in '64.
But the problem is it's
not that long ago.
It's still a tight area to work in. So you know, if you get a big crane in there, certainly you can pick it up. But the problem is getting a big crane in there to pick it up.
And of course, 4,000 years ago, there are no big cranes.
No big cranes. So that's the question: how did they build these structures? You know. But you mentioned a large, very tall, humanoid kind of. Lake Winnipesaukee, there's a Dr. Heald who does a history of the Lakes region, New Hampshire, and back in, I think in the 1800s on the North Shore of Lake Winnipesaukee, they found the giant up there too, the remains. So this stone came out of the same place as this stone, and this stone here, according to Barry Fell, is Libyan. And because the Libyans were in Spain and Portugal too, along with the Phoenicians and the ancient Celts, which brings up the stone next to Kelsey here. And Barry Fell identified that as reading Bell. One line down, I think we have it upside down. One line here would be B. The two lines would be L. You have to insert the vowel.
So once again, it goes back into the origin of the site and who they dedicate the site with.
Bell or Baal. Yeah, the same guy.
And I can't stress this enough. The Canaanites were, that's a very broad term, but it hails back to the biblical Nephilim, the Nephilim, the giants.
And right by your hands, between your hands there, is another one. And that one's a little harder to see. But
no, I can see it. The runes are small, but I can see it.
And actually, that's a sun symbol to Baal, according to Barry Fell. And actually, it's Celtic. Actually, it's Celtic Bell or Baal. You know, so that's another one. And these are some of the inscriptions that have been found here, but not all of them.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
We have written language that tells us who this entire site was dedicated to, and it's dedicated to Baal of the Canaanites. And that rewrites history. That rewrites history. It shows us that someone was here 4,000 years ago, that they came from the Middle East, specifically the Canaanites, or an overarching name for Nephilim tribes, but that's what they are. So we have written proof that this site was dedicated to Baal of the Canaanites, and the Canaanites are a Nephilim tribe. That is just incredible. What an amazing find.
And it's one of several inscriptions that have been found here and across the Americas, actually, from here to South America, too. So it's not the only one.
In my opinion, this is the entrance in some ways to the entire site. And what we see here is a serpent head, 2,500 feet, in a circle, which encloses the site. So this is a very important part, because what we see is the tail coming in this way, and here's the head. It's an Ouroboros, which is an ancient occult symbol, the serpent eating its tail. Speak about that, please.
Yeah, well, Kelsey and I have been looking at some of these walls for a while, and that's one thing we talked about this too, I think, is that this looks like a serpent eating its tail, and we were doing that out of the clear blue sky without too much reference, you know, but that's what it looks like. And we've had other visitors come here and show us some artwork from Greek and other cultures, and that's one of the themes, a serpent eating its tail. We have a couple more examples to show you later if we have time during your week's stay here. All right, we're standing near the watch house, the first structure you'll come to at America Stonehenge. And this watch house has a large glacial boulder with the entrance of the structure just to the left of it. And there are about 50 of these in New England, very similar arranged structures. Recently, in the last 2 years, we've been looking at walls a little more carefully, and we found some of these walls seem to be what we call a serpentine wall. In other words, a wall looks like a snake or a serpent. My first one I found was about the spring of 2016. We've been here over 60 years, and we're just starting to see some of these things now. Part of it's because we didn't open our eyes enough. The other thing is brush, debris, trees kind of obscure some of this. Well, right behind me, you can see the watch house. It's got the head of the what we think of a serpent, and it looks very similar to one in Stonington, Connecticut, except the one in Stonington does have the humps in the wall behind it, but it only goes maybe 100 feet. This particular wall behind me, the undulating wall, there's like 3 humps right here. Then it goes around the hill and encircles the entire site of about 15 acres, and it runs 2,550 feet. It does come back in front of the watch house. It does one more hump, which we've always noticed over the last 60-something years, but we didn't put 2 and 2 together. We just thought it was kind of an interesting wall like this, a 90-degree twist with a pointed tail on it. And we've been walking by it for decades. And now if you look at the whole thing and you can see it, it's like it's hard to mistake now. I think it's a serpent. And a serpent goes back in the Bible. It's with St. Paddy chasing out the serpent worship of Ireland. It's on our medical staff. It's in Gobekli Tepe, over almost 12,000-year-old site. It's everywhere.
I'm at the entrance to the site, the double-walled entrance to the site, America Stonehenge. And what we did is we tried to figure out, is there any alignment to constellations? And what we discovered is that this is in direct line with Ophiuchus, the serpent holder. This is so deliberate. And as far as I know, that's never been discovered on this site. So we can see we're peeling back the layers of the mystery here, and it's absolutely astounding. The sacrificial table, or altar as I prefer to call it, remains one of the most important discoveries of America's Stonehenge. There is a groove that borders the slab to collect what I believe would have been blood from a ritual sacrifice. The altar is tilted so that the blood can be collected at its base. There is also the hidden chamber with the oracle tube that would have created a very eerie effect to those participating in the ritual, as the voice would have been amplified and seemed to come from nowhere. Think about it. We have the inscription on the ballstone that tells us this site was dedicated to Baal of the Canaanites. This stone was found near the sacrificial table. Is it really that hard for us to understand that this site may have been constructed by the Phoenicians, who were an ancient seafaring people? The Canaanites were one of the Nephilim tribes mentioned in our Bibles. Are we looking at the fingerprints of the Nephilim? We're here at what I believe is the most controversial artifact in America Stonehenge. You call it the sacrificial table. I prefer to call it the sacrificial altar, because to me, with the grooves and everything that this seems to represent, I find very troubling. Please speak to that.
Okay, yeah, it is well, we think it's a table kind of a thing. It's about 9 feet by 6 feet, sits on 4 legs. When it was first photographed, the dirt came up to almost to the side of the table. About 2 feet of dirt had accumulated over many, many years. The original investigators thought back in the 1930s it was sitting on the ground. They excavated, they found the 4 legs, much to their surprise, it was actually elevated. And behind you there is where we found the speaking tube. And it had a block of stone concealing it on this side. Inside the oracle chamber, 6 feet away from the other side of it, was also a block of stone. So whoever closed the site up at the end seemed to have concealed the speaking tube with blocks of stone. So the table, the groove on it is actually trapezoidal in shape. It's a deep groove, as you mentioned. It goes around the table. We always thought it was rectangular. It's actually 9 inches narrower at the top than the bottom, significantly. And then the runnels over there. And on the other side, there is a cutout in the bedrock where a vase could sit to collect the fluid, possibly.
If it is human sacrifice, there seems to be a platform directly above it, so people could stand there and watch the proceedings. That painting that you have is very troubling, showing what seems to be someone on this table with their legs wide open like this, and there seems to be some sort of restraining device. Of course, that's conjecture. We don't know what it really is, but we find that interesting.
So this is a painting my dad did back in the 60s. This stone exists. It's about 75 miles southwest of here in Massachusetts.
Okay.
It's on a hill called Mount Mineral in Shutesbury, Mass. And there are some stone structures associated with this. This stone, from the history we have, was laying face down. Some farmer was up there doing something, and he overturned the stone. And when he did, this carving appeared. And it's actually a carving in relief, or, it's like an anaglyph, we call it. So on it, it has a shape of kind of a bell shape, which reminds us of the table. It is the shape of our table. And on it looks like a person with the legs spread out. And it has like a face, of course, and it actually has something around the neck. We're not sure what that signifies. But down here, this is the interesting part, that little circle. If you remember, our table has a groove on it, trapezoidal in shape.
Right.
This part of it right here, there's a little runnel.
Right.
So if a fluid was on the table, it will run, and then it will go through that little runnel, and it will fall off. And right there is where that cutout in the bedrock is. Did they put a ceramic vase there, and that represents a lip of a vase? Anybody's guess. But it looks like our table.
If human sacrifice was practiced here, that's extremely troubling to everyone. And we know that ancient cultures did this all throughout history. We see this over and over and over again. We know that the Israelites sacrificed their children. We know that in Newark, Ohio, there was sacrificial tables and human sacrifice was done there. Fritz, when you're standing here and you see this, and you think of Newark, Ohio, which we spent a lot of time on, is there a correlation in your mind?
There is some. I mean, some of the burial mounds around Newark had just skulls without bodies. So there's some conjecture that in fact was ritual sacrifice. So this may tie in very similar to that.
So 1937, about 80 years ago, somewhere in that time frame, people come here, and this whole thing is basically backfilled with dirt, and they think that this is bedrock, and then they start digging, like you mentioned. Now, could that be an accumulation of, let's say, thousands of years where the site wasn't used by anyone?
That's what we think anyway. And if they had been more careful with modern techniques, we could actually go down through those layers.
Right, and see.
And say, date it and see more. But yeah, when you look at the photographs, it looks like it's been sitting here for eons. I mean, that's a couple feet of dirt. And this is kind of a gathering place to collect all of the soil, but it would still take a long, long time for that much dirt to accumulate next to this table. And again, they thought it was just like sitting on the ground. They didn't know it had stone legs, a speaking tube. It just looked like a rock laying there,
Mm-hmm.
And you could see the surface of it that had some debris on it and everything. It wasn't clean like it is today. So
on the island of Malta, there's a place called the Hypogeum. They won't allow any cameras there or any type of filming at all. In fact, when you go there, you have to take your cell phone and cameras and you put them in a little locker and you have the key and off you go. And if you violate that, you're kicked out. So why can't you take pictures? But the bottom line is, it's all underground. It's very creepy. There are some places where there's these huge rooms. I mean, the ceilings are over 20 feet high. Huge rooms. And then other places where it's almost like a labyrinth. It's like maybe a giant's in one place when he's trying to get these people who are in this little maze type thing, and they can run and hide from him. I mean, that's all speculation. But where I want to go with this, on Malta, there were these speaking tubes, and I actually accessed one and did a sound into it, and it reverberated all throughout the chamber. So this area here directly to my left is where the chamber is, and it reminds me again of chambers that we saw in Sardinia, where this you talked about this little bed area in there, where the initiate would go in, and according to some people, they would stay there and commune with the spirits of the dead giants or the Nephilim. Your thoughts?
Very possibly. That chamber has a lot of features, and including that about an 8 to 9 foot bed in there, and there's no purpose for that for a farm. It looks very ceremonial. The chamber appears to be hidden, so if you are standing up behind it, you don't even know that chamber exists.
Right, exactly.
So I think it was all part of some sort of a ceremony. It could have taken place on solstices, equinoxes, so people would gather up here like a pilgrimage. They'd come up here and they'd see the celebration, and As far as who they sacrificed, what they sacrificed, it's speculation, as you mentioned, but many cultures around the world did sacrifice human beings. So it'd be a little unusual that it didn't happen in this part of the country, It happened almost everywhere else.
And of course, this whole site is built on the serpent motif. The site actually points to the constellation Draco, the dragon.
Yes.
So who is the prince of the power of the air? Who is the dragon? And who demands human sacrifice? And I think this all points back to the prince of the power of the air, i.e. the dragon. And that's why we're on the trail. This is, I would posit that this is a Nephilim site. That this was, that these huge stones that we see, these megaliths, were not quarried and moved by human beings. What is the actual estimate weight of the stone table here?
Yeah, it's about 4.5 tons, 9,000 pounds, about 163 pounds per cubic foot. So you can do the math on it.
So 4 tons. The question is, it begs the question, how is this thing moved? If the site is 4,000 years old and we don't have beasts of burden here to move the stone, how were they moved? How were they quarried? And that's incredible. How was this groove actually, was it kind of pecked out? We don't have the answers, but what's enigmatic to me about it are the standing stones and of course the table. The standing stone behind us, at least 2 tons, I would estimate.
Yeah, it's a very tall. Yeah, and,
this one over here,
very similar to it. Yeah.
So I mean, why are they placed there? And everything is done, in my way of thinking, with great deliberation on this site.
A lot of symbolism, a lot of religion tied into it. It doesn't look like a farm or a site of factory, nothing like that. It's not utilitarian at all. It's very ceremonial, I think. Yeah.
America's Stonehenge used to be called Mystery Hill. In some ways, this site is still mysterious, its secrets remain hidden from us, lost in the distant past, that separates us from when the site was originally constructed and what remains of it now. What we do know is that the ball stone is real. There is provenance in regard to its discovery. The stone lay in the museum for 11 long years until Professor Barry Fell deciphered its meaning, which dedicated the site to Baal of the Canaanites. This alone rewrites history as we know it, as the Phoenicians were in fact in the New World hundreds of years before Columbus. Then there's the sacrificial altar and the hidden oracle chamber behind it. We showed the similarities between the chamber and other sites that we explored in Sardinia at the Grave of the Giants and in Norba, Italy. Was a hidden bed-like area used to communicate with the spirits of a Nephilim and a dark occult ritual? We think so. The weight of the altar, and along with the huge stone that served as a roof of what is now a collapsed chamber, it begs the question, how were these stones cut, moved, and placed there thousands of years ago? And more importantly, by whom? In part 2, we will discuss the solar alignments that are an integral part of America's Stonehenge. Dennis Stone revealed some discoveries that were absolutely amazing. As Fritz Zimmerman stated, America's Stonehenge may be the axis mundi of the world. There is a hidden history that has been kept from the peoples of the world, and that's why we're on the trail. think the most astounding and significant find that you guys have discovered, and of course this is the work of your son Kelsey, when he first drew that line just to see where we go from the summer solstice standing stone, which is incredible. And it splits the center trilithon at Stonehenge, England. You can't do this unless you're in the air.
Well, what I never realized, this is the axis mundi of the ancient world.
Wow.
That everything is emanating out of this spot right here.